23-year-old Aaron Hernandez stood at the peak of American athletic achievement on June 16, 2013, with a $40 million contract extension as the New England Patriots' star tight end, a Super Bowl ring within reach, and millions of adoring fans who saw him as the ultimate American success story. Less than 24 hours later, on the night of June 17, 2013, Hernandez would pick up 27-year-old Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player who was dating his fiancée's sister and who considered Hernandez a friend and mentor, drive him to an industrial park less than a mile from his mansion and shoot him 6 times in the back and chest with a .45 caliber Glock, execution style, because Lloyd had allegedly disrespected him at a Boston nightclub 2 nights earlier. Before we continue with this disturbing case, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. Hernandez believed his fame, his wealth, and his status as an NFL superstar made him untouchable, that he could commit murder, and the justice system would never dare to bring down someone so important, so beloved by millions, so integral to the Patriots' championship aspirations. He bragged to his 2 accomplices that night, Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, that he had got away with a double murder the previous year, shooting 2 Cape Verdean immigrants outside a Boston nightclub in July 2012. After one of them accidentally spilled a drink on him, and that no one would ever be able to prove anything because famous people don't go to prison. For 9 days after Lloyd's murder, as police discovered the body, identified Hernandez as a suspect, and began building their case, Hernandez continued playing the role of NFL star, attending Patriots practices, working out with teammates, and posting photos on social media of himself with his daughter, convinced that his carefully constructed alibi and his celebrity status would protect him from consequences. But on June 26, 2013, Massachusetts State Police arrested Aaron Hernandez at his home and charged him with first-degree murder, and the New England Patriots released him from the team just 90 minutes later, his $40 million contract voided, his NFL career over, his life as he knew it destroyed. The case that followed would become one of the most sensational trials in American sports history, featuring surveillance footage, text messages, destroyed evidence, a jailhouse romance scandal, and ultimately, the devastating testimony of Carlos Ortiz, one of Hernandez's closest associates, who was with him the night of the murder, and who, after initially being charged with murder himself, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, taking the stand to describe in graphic detail how Aaron Hernandez had executed Odin Lloyd, while the victim begged for his life. On April 15, 2015, after 36 hours of deliberation, a jury found Aaron Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder and 5 weapons charges, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence in Massachusetts for first-degree murder. Less than 2 years later, on April 19, 2017, Aaron Hernandez would be found hanging in his prison cell at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, having committed suicide just days after being acquitted in the 2012 double murder trial, taking with him to his grave the full truth about why he killed Odin Lloyd and whatever other secrets his violent life had hidden. Aaron Joseph Hernandez was born on November 6, 1989, in Bristol, Connecticut, to Dennis Hernandez and Terry Valentine Hernandez. Bristol was a working-class city about 20 miles southwest of Hartford, and the Hernandez family lived in a modest neighborhood where Aaron and his older brother Dennis Jr., known as DJ, grew up surrounded by football. Their father, Dennis, was a former high school football star who had never made it to the professional level, but who channeled his athletic dreams into coaching his sons, pushing them relentlessly from early childhood to excel in the sport that had defined his own youth. Aaron was a natural athlete from the start, fast, coordinated, and competitive in ways that set him apart from other children his age. By the time he was in elementary school, Aaron was already playing on youth football teams several years above his age group, dominating games against older, bigger kids with a combination of raw talent and an aggressive playing style that impressed coaches and scouts. But the Hernandez household was not a happy one. Dennis Sr. was described by those who knew the family as demanding, controlling, and physically abusive, using corporal punishment to discipline his sons and creating an atmosphere of fear in the home. Aaron's mother, Terry, worked as a secretary at the school Aaron attended, and while she loved her sons, she struggled to protect them from their father's volatile temper. Aaron attended Bristol Central High School, where he became a three-sport star athlete in football, basketball, and track. On the football field, Aaron played both wide receiver and defensive back, showcasing the versatility and athleticism that would later make him an NFL star. His high school coach compared him to Randy Moss, one of the greatest wide receivers in NFL history, noting that Aaron had the same combination of size, speed, and natural ball handling ability. By his junior year, Aaron was receiving recruiting letters from major college football programs across the country, including Florida, Michigan, and USC. But Aaron's high school years were also marked by troubling behavior off the field. He was part of a group of friends who engaged in marijuana use, underage drinking, and occasional fights with rival groups from neighboring towns. Teachers and administrators noted that Aaron seemed to have two distinct personalities. On the football field and in front of coaches and scouts, he was polite, focused, and disciplined. Away from football, he was increasingly aggressive, confrontational, and drawn to a street lifestyle that seemed at odds with his athletic future. This duality, the talented athlete and the troubled young man, would characterize Aaron's entire life. In January 2006, during Aaron's junior year of high school, his father Dennis died suddenly from complications related to a routine hernia surgery. Dennis was only 49 years old, and his unexpected death devastated the family. For Aaron, losing his father was a catastrophic blow that removed the primary disciplinarian and motivating force in his life. While Dennis Sr. had been harsh and controlling, he had also been the person who pushed Aaron toward football excellence, who attended every game, who had a clear vision for Aaron's future. After his father's death, Aaron's behavior spiraled. His marijuana use increased. He became more involved with a rougher crowd in Bristol, and his mother struggled to control him. Despite these personal struggles, Aaron's athletic talent remained undeniable. During his senior year at Bristol Central, he caught 67 passes for 807 yards and 24 touchdowns, earning first-team All-State honors and cementing his status as one of the top high school football prospects in the country. He accepted a full scholarship to the University of Florida, one of the premier college football programs in the nation, coached by Urban Meyer, who had a reputation for both developing NFL talent and overlooking disciplinary issues as long as players produced on the field. Aaron arrived at the University of Florida in the fall of 2007 as a highly touted freshman tight end. The transition from high school star to college athlete is difficult for many players, but Aaron excelled immediately. He played in all 13 games as a true freshman, catching 34 passes for 381 yards and 5 touchdowns, helping Florida finish the season 9-4. But more impressive was his performance in practice, where he routinely dominated older, more experienced players, showcasing the rare combination of size, 6'1", 245 pounds, speed, and hands that made him a matchup nightmare for opposing defenses. Aaron's sophomore season in 2008 was when he truly announced himself as an elite talent. He caught 68 passes for 850 yards and 5 touchdowns, becoming quarterback Tim Tebow's favorite target and helping lead Florida to an undefeated regular season, a SEC championship, and ultimately a BCS national championship victory over Oklahoma. Aaron was named a second-team All-American and was widely considered one of the best tight ends in college football. At just 19 years old, Aaron Hernandez was a national champion, with NFL scouts already projecting him as a first-round draft pick. But beneath the on-field success, Aaron's off-field life at Florida was increasingly troubled. He was involved in multiple incidents that raised red flags for coaches and administrators. In September 2007, just weeks into his freshman year, Aaron was questioned by campus police in connection with a shooting at a Gainesville nightclub that left 2 people wounded. Witnesses told police they had seen Aaron arguing with someone before gunshots were fired, and that Aaron had been in the area when the shooting occurred. Aaron denied involvement, no charges were filed, and the incident was quietly handled by the football program, with Aaron receiving what was described as an internal suspension that kept him out of 1 game. In 2008, Aaron was involved in a bar fight in Gainesville, where he allegedly punched a bar employee who questioned Aaron's age and refused to serve him alcohol. The bar employee required treatment for a ruptured eardrum. Again, the incident was handled internally by the football program, and no criminal charges were filed. Urban Meyer and the Florida coaching staff reportedly had multiple meetings with Aaron about his behavior, warning him that his off-field conduct could derail his NFL future. But Aaron seemed unable or unwilling to change his associations or lifestyle. Aaron's junior year in 2009 was his final season at Florida. He caught 68 passes for 850 yards and 5 touchdowns, earning first-team All-SEC honors and solidifying his status as one of the premier tight ends in college football. After the season, Aaron declared for the 2010 NFL Draft, forgoing his senior year to pursue his professional football dream. On paper, Aaron was one of the best tight end prospects in years. He had size, speed, excellent hands, and 3 years of production at one of college football's elite programs. Many draft analysts projected him as a late first-round or early second-round pick, which would have meant a multi-million-dollar signing bonus and the financial security Aaron had dreamed of since childhood. But as the NFL draft approached in April 2010, rumors began circulating among NFL teams about Aaron's character issues. Teams conducting background checks heard about the nightclub shooting incident at Florida, the bar fight that left a bartender with a ruptured eardrum, failed drug tests for marijuana, and concerns from Florida coaches about Aaron's associations with questionable individuals from his hometown of Bristol, Connecticut. Some teams took Aaron off their draft boards entirely, unwilling to invest a high draft pick in a player with so many red flags. As the draft unfolded over 3 days, Aaron watched as other tight ends were selected ahead of him, his draft stock plummeting due to concerns about his character rather than his on-field abilities. Finally, in the 4th round, with the 113th overall pick, the New England Patriots selected Aaron Hernandez. The Patriots, led by legendary coach Bill Belichick and quarterback Tom Brady, had a history of taking chances on talented but troubled players, believing their strong organizational culture and veteran leadership could rehabilitate character concerns. Aaron signed a 4-year contract worth approximately $2.4 million toward $200,000 signing bonus, far less than he would have earned as a first or second round pick, but still life-changing money for a kid from Bristol, Connecticut. The draft day slide would haunt Aaron, creating a chip on his shoulder and a burning desire to prove all the teams that passed on him had made a terrible mistake. Aaron's rookie season with the Patriots in 2010 was a success on the field. He caught 45 passes for 563 yards and 6 touchdowns, forming a dynamic tight end duo with Rob Gronkowski that would become one of the most feared offensive weapons in the NFL. The Patriots went 14-2 during the regular season and reached the playoffs, where they lost to the New York Jets in the divisional round. Aaron showed flashes of the elite talent that had made him a star at Florida, running precise routes, making difficult catches in traffic, and displaying the versatility to line up as a traditional tight end, an H-back, or split out wide as a receiver. Patriots coaches believed they had found a foundational piece for their offense for years to come. The 2011 season was Aaron's breakout year. He caught 79 passes for 910 yards and 7 touchdowns, earning his first Pro Bowl selection. Together with Gronkowski, who had 90 catches for 1,327 yards and 17 touchdowns, Aaron formed the most productive tight end tandem in NFL history. The Patriots went 13-3 during the regular season and advanced to Super Bowl XLVI, where they faced the New York Giants. Aaron had 8 catches for 67 yards in the Super Bowl, but the Patriots lost 21-17, a devastating defeat that denied Aaron his first championship ring. Despite the loss, Aaron's performance throughout the 2011 season proved he was one of the elite tight ends in the NFL, and the Patriots began negotiating a long-term contract extension to keep him in New England for the foreseeable future. On August 27, 2012, just days before the start of the 2012 NFL season, the New England Patriots signed Aaron Hernandez to a 5-year contract extension worth $40 million, including $16 million guaranteed. At age 22, Aaron Hernandez was now one of the highest-paid tight ends in the NFL, financially secure for life, and positioned to be a cornerstone of the Patriots' offense for years to come. To the outside world, Aaron had achieved everything he had worked for since childhood. He was a professional athlete with a Super Bowl ring within reach. He was wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, and he had just gotten engaged to his high school sweetheart, Cheyenne Jenkins, with whom he had a baby daughter named Avielle. But beneath this veneer of success, Aaron Hernandez was living a dangerous double life that would ultimately destroy everything he had built. While he played the role of NFL star on Sundays, Aaron maintained close ties to a group of friends from Bristol, Connecticut, men with criminal records, gang affiliations, and involvement in drug dealing and violence. Aaron would frequently fly these friends to Boston, put them up in hotels, give them money, and party with them at nightclubs and strip clubs in the Boston area. This crew included Carlos Ortiz, a childhood friend from Bristol who had multiple drug arrests, and Ernest Wallace, known as Hobo, another Bristol associate with a criminal record. On the night of July 16, 2012, less than 2 months before signing his $40 million contract extension, Aaron Hernandez committed what investigators believe was his first double murder. Hernandez was at a Boston nightclub called Cure Lounge with several friends when Daniel de Abreu, a 29-year-old Cape Verdean immigrant, accidentally bumped into Hernandez on the dance floor and spilled his drink. Hernandez, who had been drinking and was reportedly high on PCP or angel dust, became enraged at this perceived disrespect. He and his friends left the nightclub, but Hernandez couldn't let it go. He told his companions he needed to handle this and armed himself with a .38 caliber revolver he kept in his vehicle. Hernandez drove around the South End neighborhood of Boston for nearly 2 hours, searching for the men who had disrespected him. Around 2:30 a.m., he spotted Deabro and his friend Safiro Furtado, aged 28, also a Cape Verdean immigrant, stopped at a red light in their BMW. Hernandez pulled up alongside them in his Toyota 4Runner, rolled down his window and said, "Yo, what's up now, N?" Choice, before firing multiple shots into the BMW. Daniel Deabro and Safiro Furtado were both killed, shot multiple times in the head and chest at point-blank range. A third passenger in the car was wounded, but survived. Hernandez then sped away, abandoning his vehicle in his uncle's garage in Bristol and returning to Rhode Island, where he was living at the time. Boston police investigated the double murder, but they had no leads, no witnesses willing to come forward, and no surveillance footage that clearly showed the shooter. The case went cold, and Hernandez believed he had gotten away with murder. He would later brag to associates, including Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, that he had killed 2 men who disrespected him, and that police would never be able to prove anything because he was too smart and too famous. This belief in his own invincibility, his conviction that his status as an NFL star made him untouchable, would embolden Hernandez to kill again less than a year later. The 2012 NFL season was statistically successful for Hernandez, who caught 51 passes for 483 yards and 5 touchdowns, despite dealing with injuries that limited his playing time. The Patriots went 12-24 and reached the AFC Championship game, where they lost to the Baltimore Ravens, denying Hernandez another chance at a Super Bowl ring. But off the field, Hernandez's behavior was becoming increasingly reckless and violent. He was frequently seen at Boston area nightclubs with known gang members, getting into altercations, and carrying weapons despite his NFL contract explicitly prohibiting such behavior. In February 2013, Hernandez was involved in a shooting incident at a strip club in Providence, Rhode Island, where he allegedly shot a man named Alexander Bradley in the face after an argument. Bradley, who was a close associate of Hernandez and had been with him at various nightclubs and parties, survived the shooting but lost his right eye. Bradley initially refused to cooperate with police, claiming he didn't know who shot him. But the incident would later become crucial evidence demonstrating Hernandez's pattern of violence and willingness to shoot people over minor disputes. It was during this period in early 2013 that Aaron Hernandez met Odin Lloyd. Lloyd was a 27-year-old semi-professional football player who played linebacker for the Boston Bandits of the New England Football League. He worked at a landscaping company during the day and played football on weekends, pursuing his dream of maybe someday making it to the NFL, even though he knew the odds were against him. Odin was dating Shania Jenkins, the sister of Hernandez's fiancée Cheyenne, and the two couples occasionally spent time together. Hernandez and Lloyd developed what appeared to be a friendship. They would text each other, work out together occasionally, and attend sporting events together. On the night of June 14, 2013, Hernandez, Cheyenne, Odin Lloyd, and Shania Jenkins attended a Boston Celtics playoff game together, sitting in Hernandez's courtside seats and appearing to enjoy each other's company. But that same night, after the game, the group went to a nightclub called Rumor in Boston. At the club, Lloyd was seen talking to some people Hernandez didn't know, men who Hernandez later claimed were associates of people connected to the 2012 double murder, though this was never confirmed. Hernandez, paranoid and suspicious due to his drug use and his guilt about the previous murders, became convinced that Lloyd was talking to these people about him, that Lloyd knew too much about his activities, and that Lloyd represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. Over the next 2 days, June 15th and 16th, Hernandez contacted Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, telling them to come to Massachusetts immediately. He told them he had a problem that needed to be handled, that someone was disrespecting him and couldn't be trusted, and that they needed to help him deal with it. Ortiz and Wallace, who were financially dependent on Hernandez and who had their own criminal histories, agreed. On June 16th, Hernandez rented a silver Nissan Altima from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, using a false name, to use as the vehicle for what would come next. The murder of Odin Lloyd occurred in the early morning hours of June 17, 2013, and the events of that night would be reconstructed through a combination of surveillance footage, cell phone records, text messages, and ultimately the testimony of Carlos Ortiz, who witnessed the killing and whose decision to cooperate with prosecutors would prove to be the most damaging evidence against Aaron Hernandez. The night began around 9:00 p.m. on June 16th, when Hernandez picked up Ernest Wallace from the Faiston Hotel in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, where Wallace had been staying. Hernandez was driving the silver Nissan Altima he had rented the previous day. Security cameras at Hernandez's mansion captured Wallace getting into the vehicle with Hernandez. Around 10 hours p.m., Hernandez drove to Boston to pick up Carlos Ortiz, who was staying at a hotel in the city. Ortiz got into the back seat of the Altima, and the three men drove back to Hernandez's mansion in North Attleboro. During the drive, according to Ortiz's later testimony, Hernandez told his two companions that they were going to take care of someone who had been disrespecting him and who couldn't be trusted. Hernandez made it clear that this person needed to be killed, and he gave both Ortiz and Wallace handguns. Hernandez himself was carrying a .45 caliber Glock. The three men arrived back at Hernandez's mansion around midnight and spent the next hour preparing for what was to come. At approximately 1:12 a.m. on June 17th, surveillance cameras captured Hernandez leaving his home, carrying what appeared to be a gun. He got into the driver's seat of the silver Nissan Altima, with Wallace in the front passenger seat and Ortiz in the back. The three men then drove to Boston to pick up Odin Lloyd. During the drive, according to Ortiz's testimony, Hernandez told them that Lloyd knew too much about his business and had been talking to people he shouldn't be talking to. Hernandez said they were going to make it look like a robbery, but that Lloyd had to be killed. Ortiz later testified that he was scared and didn't want to be involved, but he was also afraid of Hernandez and felt he had no choice but to go along. At 2:10 a.m., Hernandez's vehicle was captured on surveillance cameras, pulling up to Odin Lloyd's house in Dorchester, a neighborhood in Boston. Lloyd came out of his house and got into the back seat of the Altima with Ortiz. According to Ortiz's testimony, Lloyd seemed relaxed and happy to see Hernandez, believing they were going to hang out or perhaps go to a club. Lloyd sent a text message to his sister at 2:33 a.m. saying he was with NFL, and that if anything happened to him, she should know he was with NFL, a message that would later prove crucial to the investigation. Hernandez drove from Boston back toward North Attleboro, with Lloyd in the back seat, apparently not realizing what was about to happen. During the drive, according to Ortiz, Lloyd mentioned that he had seen Hernandez talking to some people at the club on June 14th and asked Hernandez if everything was okay. This question seemed to confirm Hernandez's paranoid belief that Lloyd knew too much and couldn't be trusted. Around 3:07 a.m., Hernandez pulled into an industrial park located less than a mile from his mansion, a remote area with abandoned warehouses and no security cameras. Hernandez told Lloyd they needed to talk and ordered everyone to get out of the vehicle. The four men stood in the industrial park parking lot, with Lloyd apparently still not understanding that he was in mortal danger. According to Ortiz's testimony at trial, Hernandez then said something to Lloyd about being disrespectful and about talking too much. Lloyd reportedly started to realize something was wrong and said, "Yo, what's going on?" Those would be his last words. Aaron Hernandez raised his .45 caliber Glock handgun and fired multiple shots at Odin Lloyd at close range. The first shot hit Lloyd in the back as he turned to run. Lloyd fell to the ground, and Hernandez stood over him and fired 5 more shots into his body, 2 shots to the chest and 3 to the head and neck area. The entire execution took less than 15 seconds. Lloyd was killed almost instantly, dying in a parking lot less than a mile from Hernandez's mansion, murdered by a man he considered a friend, over perceived disrespect and paranoid fears. According to Ortiz's testimony, after shooting Lloyd, Hernandez looked at the body for a moment, then turned to Wallace and Ortiz and said, "Let's go." The 3 men got back into the silver Nissan Altima and drove back to Hernandez's mansion, arriving around 3:27 a.m. Surveillance cameras at the mansion captured the vehicle pulling into the driveway and captured Hernandez, Wallace, and Ortiz getting out and entering the house. Hernandez was carrying the Glock that he had just used to kill Lloyd. Once inside the mansion, according to Ortiz, Hernandez seemed calm and even pleased with what he had done. He told Ortiz and Wallace that they all needed to stick to the story, and that if anyone asked, they had all been at the house all night. Hernandez also told them that police wouldn't be able to prove anything because he was an NFL player and the justice system didn't go after famous people. He referenced the 2012 double murder, bragging that he had gotten away with killing 2 people the previous year and that this would be no different. This statement, Hernandez bragging about getting away with murder, would later be crucial testimony from Ortiz that helped convince the jury of Hernandez's guilt and his pattern of violence. Over the next several hours, Hernandez, Wallace, and Ortiz worked to dispose of evidence. Hernandez gave Wallace the silver Nissan Altima to return to the rental car company, instructing him to have it cleaned and detailed to remove any forensic evidence. Hernandez took the .45 caliber Glock and the other weapons and, according to later evidence, destroyed them or disposed of them in locations that have never been found. Hernandez also contacted his fiancée Cheyenne and, in a series of coded text messages, instructed her to dispose of a box that was in their basement, a box that prosecutors believe contained weapons, ammunition, and clothing worn during the murder. At approximately 5:30 a.m. on June 17th, a jogger discovered Odin Lloyd's body in the industrial park and called 911. Police responded to the scene and found Lloyd lying face up in the parking lot, shot multiple times, with shell casings scattered around his body. The medical examiner determined that Lloyd had been shot 6 times, once in the back, twice in the chest, and 3 times in the head and neck, and that he had died from a combination of these gunshot wounds. The manner of death was ruled homicide, and detectives from the North Attleboro Police Department and the Massachusetts State Police began investigating. The investigation moved quickly, because Lloyd's body was found so close to Aaron Hernandez's mansion, less than a mile away, and because of the text message Lloyd had sent his sister at 2:33 a.m., saying he was with NFL. Detectives interviewed Lloyd's family and friends, who told them that Lloyd had been with Aaron Hernandez the previous evening, and that Hernandez had picked Lloyd up around 2:00 a.m. This information immediately made Hernandez a person of interest, and police began conducting surveillance on his property and seeking search warrants. On June 18th, just one day after Lloyd's murder, police executed a search warrant at Aaron Hernandez's mansion. During the search, they found surveillance footage from Hernandez's home security system, showing him leaving the house with what appeared to be a gun at 1:12 a.m., returning at 3:27 a.m., and then spending several hours apparently cleaning and disposing of evidence. Police also found text messages between Hernandez and Lloyd arranging to meet up the night of June 16th, and text messages between Hernandez and Wallace and Ortiz discussing coming to Massachusetts. Perhaps most damningly, police found the silver Nissan Altima that Hernandez had rented, which Wallace had returned to Enterprise Rent-A-Car on June 17th. Despite attempts to clean the vehicle, forensic examiners found a shell casing in the driver's side door panel, a .45 caliber shell casing that matched the shell casings found at the murder scene. They also found tire impressions near Lloyd's body that matched the tires on the Nissan Altima, and surveillance footage from businesses near the industrial park showing a silver Nissan Altima driving toward the industrial park at approximately 3:17 a.m. on June 17th. On June 26, 2013, just 9 days after Odin Lloyd's murder, Massachusetts State Police arrested Aaron Hernandez at his home and charged him with first-degree murder. The arrest was captured by news cameras, showing Hernandez being led out of his mansion in handcuffs, wearing a white t-shirt, appearing calm but surprised. Within 90 minutes of his arrest, the New England Patriots released a statement announcing they had terminated Hernandez's contract, effective immediately. His $40 million extension was voided, his NFL career was over, and he would never play professional football again. Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace were arrested shortly after Hernandez and initially charged with accessory to murder. Both men were offered plea deals by prosecutors. If they agreed to testify truthfully about what happened the night of June 17th, they would receive reduced sentences. Wallace initially refused to cooperate, but Ortiz, after consulting with his attorney and facing the possibility of life in prison, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in January 2014. His testimony would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case against Aaron Hernandez. The trial of Aaron Hernandez for the first-degree murder of Odin Lloyd began on January 29, 2015, in Bristol County Superior Court in Fall River, Massachusetts, presided over by Judge Susan Garsh. The trial would last nearly 3 months, feature over 130 witnesses, and captivate national attention as one of the most high-profile murder cases in American sports history. Hernandez entered the courtroom each day wearing a suit, clean-cut and composed, flanked by his high-powered defense team, led by attorney James Sultan, who faced the daunting task of defending a client against overwhelming physical evidence and the anticipated testimony of a key eyewitness who had been present at the murder. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorneys William McCauley and Patrick Bomberg, built their case on 3 pillars of evidence: forensic evidence linking Hernandez to the murder scene, surveillance footage and cell phone records documenting his movements the night of the killing, and most critically, the eyewitness testimony of Carlos Ortiz, who had been in the car with Hernandez when Odin Lloyd was executed. The defense strategy was to attack the credibility of Ortiz, to raise reasonable doubt about who actually pulled the trigger, and to argue that while Hernandez may have been present when Lloyd was killed, he was not the shooter and therefore should not be convicted of first-degree murder. Opening statements began on January 29th, with prosecutor William McCauley addressing the jury, describing Aaron Hernandez as a man who had everything: wealth, fame, a promising career, but who threw it all away because of his paranoia, his drug use, and his inability to control his violent impulses. McCauley told the jury they would see surveillance footage of Hernandez leaving his home with a gun, cell phone records placing him at the murder scene, and most importantly, they would hear from someone who was there that night and witnessed Hernandez shoot Odin Lloyd 6 times. Defense attorney James Salton countered by telling the jury that Carlos Ortiz was a career criminal who had agreed to testify against Hernandez in exchange for a sweetheart plea deal, that Ortiz's testimony couldn't be trusted because he had every incentive to lie to save himself from a life sentence, and that the physical evidence was circumstantial. It proved Hernandez was at the scene, but it didn't prove he was the shooter. Salton suggested that Ernest Wallace might have been the actual killer, or that Lloyd's death might have been the result of some dispute involving drugs, rather than Hernandez's paranoid belief that Lloyd knew too much. The prosecution spent the first month of the trial methodically presenting their forensic evidence. Crime scene investigators testified about finding Odin Lloyd's body in the industrial park, describing the 6 gunshot wounds and the shell casings scattered around the body. Ballistics experts testified that the shell casings were .45 caliber, consistent with a Glock handgun. Medical examiners described Lloyd's injuries in graphic detail, explaining that he had been shot once in the back while trying to run away, had fallen to the ground, and had then been shot 5 more times at close range while lying defenseless. The wounds, the medical examiner testified, indicated that whoever shot Lloyd had stood over him and deliberately executed him. Forensic examiners testified about finding a shell casing inside the silver Nissan Altima that Hernandez had rented, a .45 caliber casing that matched the casings found at the murder scene. They explained that this shell casing had likely been ejected from the murder weapon inside the vehicle, suggesting the gun had been handled or possibly fired inside the car. Defense attorneys tried to argue that the shell casing could have been planted or could have come from a different gun, but forensic experts testified that the unique markings on the casing conclusively linked it to the same weapon that killed Lloyd. Cell phone records became crucial evidence demonstrating the timeline of events the night of June 17, 2013. Cell tower data showed Hernandez's phone traveling from North Attleboro to Boston to pick up Lloyd at 2:33 a.m., then traveling back toward North Attleboro, with the phone pinging off a cell tower near the industrial park at 3:23 a.m., just 2 minutes before Lloyd's final text message to his sister saying, "Just so you know," a text prosecutors argued was Lloyd's way of telling his sister where he was because he was beginning to sense he was in danger. The surveillance footage was perhaps the most damaging physical evidence. Prosecutors showed the jury videos from Hernandez's home security system, which Hernandez had failed to completely destroy despite his efforts. The footage showed Hernandez leaving his home at 1:09 a.m. on June 17th, carrying what appeared to be a gun. It showed the silver Nissan Altima leaving with 3 occupants and returning at 3:27 a.m., just 2 minutes after Lloyd was killed, with the same 3 occupants. Most damningly, it showed Hernandez entering his home at 3:27 a.m., holding what appeared to be a gun, which prosecutors argued was the murder weapon. Additional surveillance footage from businesses near the industrial park showed the silver Nissan Altima driving toward the murder scene at 3:07 a.m. and leaving at 3:25 a.m., the exact window during which Lloyd was killed. Tire track analysis showed that the Altima's tires matched impressions found near Lloyd's body, and shoe print analysis matched shoes Hernandez was wearing in surveillance footage to footprints found at the crime scene. The prosecution also presented evidence of Hernandez's efforts to cover up the murder. They showed that Hernandez had smashed his cell phone into pieces and given it to police in that condition. They presented testimony from a house cleaning service that Hernandez had hired the day after the murder to thoroughly clean his home. They showed text messages between Hernandez and his fiancée, Cheyenne Jenkins, in which Hernandez, using coded language, instructed Cheyenne to remove a box from their basement and dispose of it. A box prosecutors believed contained the murder weapon, ammunition, and clothing worn during the killing. Cheyenne was seen on surveillance footage leaving the house with a garbage bag and placing it in a dumpster. The contents of that bag were never recovered. After a month of forensic evidence, cell phone records, and surveillance footage, the prosecution called their star witness, Carlos Ortiz. On March 23, 2015, Ortiz took the witness stand, raising his right hand and swearing to tell the truth. He was nervous, speaking quietly at first, frequently glancing at Hernandez, who sat at the defense table staring at him with what observers described as a cold, intimidating gaze. But as Ortiz began his testimony under Prosecutor Macaulay's questioning, he told a story that was devastating for Aaron Hernandez's defense. Ortiz testified that he had known Hernandez since they were teenagers, growing up in Bristol, Connecticut. He described Hernandez as someone who liked to be in control, who had a temper, and who didn't like to be disrespected. Ortiz admitted that he himself had a criminal record, drug charges, weapons charges, and that he had been financially dependent on Hernandez, who would give him money and gifts. Ortiz acknowledged that he was testifying in exchange for a plea deal that would allow him to serve 7 years instead of life in prison, but he insisted that his testimony was truthful and that he was coming forward because what happened to Odin wasn't right. Ortiz described receiving a phone call from Hernandez on June 16, 2013, telling him to come to Massachusetts immediately. Ortiz said Hernandez sounded stressed and told him, "We got a problem we need to handle." Ortiz traveled from Connecticut to Boston, where Hernandez picked him up around 10 p.m. During the drive back to Hernandez's mansion, Ortiz testified. Hernandez told him and Wallace that there was someone who couldn't be trusted and who knew too much about Hernandez's business, and that they were going to take care of it. Ortiz testified that Hernandez gave him and Wallace handguns. He couldn't remember what type, but he described them as black pistols, and that Hernandez himself was carrying a larger gun, which Ortiz identified from photographs as a Glock 45 caliber. Ortiz said he didn't want to be involved, but was afraid to refuse Hernandez. Around 1 a.m. on June 17th, the three men left Hernandez's mansion in the silver Nissan Altima and drove to Boston to pick up Odin Lloyd. When Ortiz described Lloyd getting into the back seat of the car with him, his voice became emotional. He said Lloyd seemed happy and relaxed, that Lloyd didn't seem to suspect anything was wrong. Ortiz testified that during the drive from Boston back toward North Attleboro, Lloyd made small talk, mentioning something about seeing Hernandez at a club a few days earlier and asking if everything was okay. Ortiz said Hernandez didn't respond, but his jaw got tight and he gripped the steering wheel harder. Then came the most crucial testimony. Ortiz described Hernandez pulling into the industrial park around 3:20 a.m. and telling everyone to get out of the car. Ortiz said Lloyd asked, "What's going on?" and started to look nervous. Hernandez, according to Ortiz, said something about Lloyd talking too much and being disrespectful. Ortiz testified that he saw Lloyd's face change as he realized he was in danger, that Lloyd said, "Yo, what are you doing?" and started to back away. Ortiz told the jury that Aaron Hernandez then raised the Glock and shot Odin Lloyd. The first shot hit Lloyd in the back as Lloyd turned to run. Lloyd fell forward onto the ground. Ortiz testified that he expected Hernandez to stop, but instead, Hernandez walked toward Lloyd's fallen body, stood over him, and fired 5 more shots into Lloyd's body. Ortiz described hearing the gunshots echoing in the industrial park, seeing muzzle flashes, and seeing Lloyd's body jump each time he was hit. The courtroom was completely silent as Ortiz described the killing. Several jurors were visibly upset, and Odin Lloyd's mother, Ursula Ward, who was sitting in the courtroom, broke down in tears and had to be comforted by family members. Aaron Hernandez sat at the defense table showing no emotion, staring at Ortiz, but betraying no reaction to the testimony. Ortiz testified that after the shooting, Hernandez looked at Lloyd's body for a moment, then turned to Ortiz and Wallace and said, "Let's go." The 3 men got back in the Altima and drove back to Hernandez's mansion. During the drive, according to Ortiz, Hernandez seemed calm and even satisfied. Hernandez told Ortiz and Wallace that they all needed to stick to the story, and that if police came asking questions, they should say they were at Hernandez's house all night. Hernandez also, according to Ortiz, bragged that he had gotten away with killing 2 people the previous year and that police couldn't prove anything because "I'm too important, they won't touch me." This statement, Hernandez bragging about getting away with murder, was exactly what the prosecution needed to establish Hernandez's pattern of violence and his belief that he was above the law. Ortiz's testimony painted a picture of a man who was not only capable of murder, but who enjoyed it, who felt empowered by it, and who believed his celebrity status made him untouchable. The defense's cross-examination of Carlos Ortiz was aggressive and thorough. James Sultan attacked Ortiz's credibility, pointing out that Ortiz had lied to police initially, that he had only agreed to cooperate after being charged with murder himself, and that his plea deal gave him every incentive to blame Hernandez rather than take responsibility for his own role in the killing. Sultan suggested that Ortiz himself might have been the shooter and was now lying to save himself. Sultan also noted that Ortiz admitted he was carrying a gun that night and questioned why the jury should believe Ortiz's version of events over any other possibility. But Ortiz held up under cross-examination. He acknowledged his criminal history and his plea deal, but he insisted his testimony about what happened in the industrial park was truthful. When Sultan suggested that Ortiz was the actual shooter, Ortiz looked directly at the jury and said, "I didn't kill Odin. Aaron did. I was there, I saw it, and I'm telling the truth about what happened." After Ortiz's testimony, the prosecution rested their case, having presented a mountain of physical evidence, surveillance footage, cell phone records, and eyewitness testimony that built an overwhelming case for Hernandez's guilt. The defense called only a handful of witnesses, primarily focusing on attacking Ortiz's credibility and suggesting that Ernest Wallace might have been the actual shooter. They presented no alternative explanation for the physical evidence linking Hernandez to the crime, and Hernandez himself chose not to testify, exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, Closing arguments took place over 2 days in mid-April 2015. Prosecutor Patrick Bomberg gave a powerful summation, walking the jury through the evidence piece by piece, showing how every piece of physical evidence corroborated Carlos Ortiz's testimony, and arguing that the evidence proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Aaron Hernandez had murdered Odin Lloyd. Bomberg ended his closing by addressing Hernandez directly, saying, "You had everything. You threw it all away. And you took an innocent man's life because of your ego, your paranoia, and your violence." James Sultan's closing argument was a last-ditch effort to create reasonable doubt. He told the jury that Carlos Ortiz was a liar whose testimony couldn't be trusted, that the physical evidence proved Hernandez was present, but not that he was the shooter, and that the prosecution's case was built on the word of a man who had every reason to lie. But even Sultan seemed to recognize the uphill battle he faced given the overwhelming evidence against his client. On April 15, 2015, after 36 hours of deliberation spanning 6 days, the jury returned their verdict. The courtroom was packed with media, law enforcement, Odin Lloyd's family, and spectators who had followed the trial for months. Aaron Hernandez sat at the defense table wearing a grey suit, his hands clasped in front of him, his face betraying no emotion, as Judge Garsh read the charges and prepared to announce the verdicts. When the jury foreperson stood and announced guilty on the charge of first-degree murder, a gasp went through the courtroom. Hernandez showed no visible reaction, simply staring straight ahead as additional guilty verdicts were read on all 5 weapons charges. The verdict meant that Aaron Hernandez, at age 25, would spend the rest of his life in prison without any possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence in Massachusetts for first-degree murder. Judge Garsh formally imposed the sentence, telling Hernandez, "You have been convicted by a jury of your peers of murder in the first degree. The law requires that I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Hernandez was immediately taken into custody and transported to the Massachusetts state prison system to begin serving his life sentence. Odin Lloyd's family wept with relief and embraced each other as the verdict was read. His mother, Ursula Ward, released a statement saying, "This verdict brings some measure of justice for my son, but it can never bring him back. Odin was a kind, loving person who was murdered for no reason by someone he trusted. I hope Aaron Hernandez thinks about what he did every day for the rest of his life." Lloyd's girlfriend, Shania Jenkins, who was also the sister of Hernandez's fiancée Cheyenne, described the conflicting emotions of seeing her sister's fiancé convicted of murdering her boyfriend, saying, "My family has been torn apart by Aaron's actions. I'm glad he's been held accountable, but the pain will never go away." Hernandez was transferred to the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, a maximum security prison in Lancaster, Massachusetts, where he was placed in a special unit for high-profile inmates. In prison, Hernandez maintained his innocence despite the conviction, filing appeals and claiming he had been wrongly convicted based on the unreliable testimony of Carlos Ortiz. But Hernandez's legal troubles were far from over. Prosecutors in Suffolk County were preparing to bring him to trial for the 2012 double murder of Daniel de Abreu and Safiro Furtado. The 2 Cape Verdean men Hernandez had allegedly shot outside a Boston nightclub after one of them spilled a drink on him. The 2012 double murder trial began on February 13, 2017, in Suffolk County Superior Court. Prosecutors presented testimony from Alexander Bradley, the man Hernandez had allegedly shot in the face in Florida in 2013, who testified that he had been with Hernandez the night of the Boston double murder and had witnessed Hernandez shoot De Abreu and Furtado. Bradley described Hernandez as being enraged that someone had spilled a drink on him and had disrespected him, and that Hernandez armed himself and spent hours driving around Boston looking for the men before finding them stopped at a red light and opening fire. But Bradley's credibility was even more questionable than Carlos Ortiz's had been. He had initially refused to cooperate with police, had sued Hernandez in civil court, and admitted to having a significant criminal record. The defense successfully attacked his testimony, and the physical evidence linking Hernandez to the 2012 murders was less conclusive than the evidence in the Lloyd case. On April 14, 2017, after 6 days of deliberation, the jury found Aaron Hernandez not guilty of the double murder charges. Hernandez appeared relieved as the verdict was read, smiling and hugging his attorneys, temporarily vindicated even though he would still spend the rest of his life in prison for the Lloyd murder. 5 days later, on April 19, 2017, at approximately 3 a.m., guards conducting their routine check of Hernandez's cell at Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center found him hanging from a bedsheet, tied to the window bars in his cell. Hernandez had wedged cardboard into the door track to prevent it from opening, and had placed a Bible open to John 3:16 near his body. Efforts to resuscitate him were unsuccessful, and Aaron Hernandez was pronounced dead at 4:07 a.m. at the age of 27. The medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by hanging. Hernandez's suicide shocked the nation and raised immediate questions about why a man who had just been acquitted in a double murder trial would take his own life. Investigators found 3 handwritten notes in his cell, one addressed to his fiancée Cheyenne Jenkins, one to his 4-year-old daughter Avielle, and one to his prison boyfriend, revealing that Hernandez had been in a homosexual relationship while incarcerated. The contents of the notes were never publicly released, but sources indicated that Hernandez expressed love for his family and seemed to be seeking peace. The suicide also had significant legal implications. Under an arcane Massachusetts legal doctrine called abatement ab initio, because Hernandez died while his murder conviction was under direct appeal, and before his appeal was heard, his conviction was technically vacated, legally erased, as if the trial had never happened. This meant that in the eyes of Massachusetts law, Aaron Hernandez died an innocent man, unconvicted of any crime. The doctrine, since abolished, caused outrage among Odin Lloyd's family and prosecutors, who felt that Hernandez had manipulated the system one final time by committing suicide before his appeals were exhausted. An autopsy revealed that Hernandez had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, a degenerative brain disease found in people who have suffered repeated head trauma. CTE is associated with behavioral changes, mood disorders, impulsivity, and poor judgment. Hernandez's CTE was described as the most severe case ever seen in someone his age, with significant damage to the frontal lobes that control decision-making and impulse control. Some observers suggested that CTE might have contributed to Hernandez's violent behavior and poor decision-making, though prosecutors and victims' families argued that millions of football players have CTE without committing murder, and that Hernandez's crimes were the result of his choices, not his brain disease. Carlos Ortiz, whose testimony had been instrumental in convicting Hernandez, was sentenced to 7 years in prison as part of his plea deal. He was released in 2020 after serving his sentence. Ernest Wallace, who refused to cooperate with prosecutors, was convicted of accessory to murder after the fact and sentenced to 4.5 to 7 years in prison. He was released in 2021. Neither man has spoken publicly about their role in Odin Lloyd's murder beyond their courtroom testimony. Shayanna Jenkins, Hernandez's fiancée, was charged with perjury for allegedly lying to the grand jury about disposing of evidence, but the charges were eventually dropped. She has raised their daughter Avielle alone and has rarely spoken publicly about Hernandez, though she has maintained that despite his crimes, he was a loving father and that she struggles to reconcile the man she loved with the man who murdered Odin Lloyd. The case of Aaron Hernandez stands as one of the most shocking falls from grace in American sports history. He went from being an NFL star with a $40 million contract and a bright future to being a convicted murderer serving life in prison, all within 2 years. His story has been the subject of multiple documentaries, books, and investigations, examining how someone with so much talent and so much to lose could throw it all away through violence and terrible decisions. The case also highlighted the important role of witness testimony in criminal trials. Without Carlos Ortiz agreeing to testify about what he witnessed in that industrial park, prosecutors would have had a much more difficult case. The physical evidence was strong, but Ortiz's eyewitness account of watching Hernandez execute Odin Lloyd was what sealed the verdict. His decision to take the stand against his friend, to tell the truth about what happened despite the social costs and the danger, exemplified how even those involved in crimes can choose redemption by helping bring justice for victims. For Odin Lloyd's family, no verdict, no prison sentence, and no amount of justice could ever bring back the son, brother, and boyfriend they lost. Odin Lloyd was 27 years old, working hard at his job, playing the football he loved on weekends, building a life with his girlfriend, and looking forward to a future he would never see because Aaron Hernandez decided he was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Lloyd's murder was senseless, motivated by nothing more than paranoia and ego, and it destroyed not just Lloyd's life, but the lives of everyone who loved him. Aaron Hernandez's story is a cautionary tale about how talent and fame are not shields against consequences, how violence always leaves victims and survivors in its wake, and how the choices we make define us far more than our abilities or our accomplishments. He could have been remembered as one of the great tight ends in NFL history, as someone who overcame a difficult childhood to achieve his dreams. Instead, he is remembered as a murderer who threw away everything for violence, who bragged about getting away with murder, and whose best friend ultimately took the stand and ensured that justice was served for Odin Lloyd.